Hey guys, it's Kat and Raythe here. Kat, we need proof of life. Well, excellent. Now that the morale is out of the way, what are we doing today? We are talking about a couple things. I'm going to be taking the polls that you guys have taken at the end of the Night Prince chapters, and we're going to go through some awesome comments, and I can't wait to discuss everything you guys have brought up. So I'm handing it over to Kat to ask the first poll.
I already know the answer to this, and you're going to laugh. Do you draw fan art?
No. When I first was doing manga with the artists I was working with, I was trying to do basically storyboards for them, and I had to literally do stick figures, and it was incredibly painful. Needless to say, thank God I stopped doing that. So no, I do not. I wish I could, but that is just not one of my skill sets.
So you're in the 11.5% of people who did respond, I can only draw stick figures. All right, the next question is, well, we know that you've played Dungeons and Dragons, so we're not even going to ask that because you talk about it a lot.
Yeah, I have a weekly game on Sunday nights.
But I would like to know, which one of these did you read growing up? Fairy tales, folk tales, mythologies, or ghost stories? Which was the most influential for you?
Honestly, I read all of those, and I would say what would be the most influential is going to be a toss between fairy tales and ghost stories.
Any of them that you particularly remember, like to this day?
Just a lot of the Brothers Grimm stuff, from Cinderella to, just those ones that you can think of. Like Hansel and Gretel really, for some reason, stuck with me.
Who doesn't want to eat a house that's made of gingerbread and candy is the thing.
It was more the cannibalism that I think got to me, and having kids like sent out into the woods by their parents because they were too poor. That's what really spoke to me, especially when they sort of did that thing in The Witcher 3, which was like that.
What was your first job?
It was babysitting.
Like almost everybody else who has taken the poll. Mine was also babysitting.
Of course, it makes sense. I was quickly stopped being a babysitter and worked at a pizzeria because I hated kids. I'm sorry, guys. I don't hate kids, but I'm not a kid person.
It's hard to take care of. I was a nanny, so it is definitely, you have to be a certain type of person to stick with the job. Let's just say that. Okay, we're going to find out how Gen X gamer are you. Do you know the answer to this question? I bet you'd like to have more bombs.
No.
Oh, okay. So you didn't play the original Legend of Zelda on the Nintendo?
I did, but I don't remember that. I played so many games since then. I'm sure that's why I don't recall it.
Do you believe in psychics or fortune tellers?
I've never found one that I actually thought was real. I'm not saying there isn't, because I definitely feel like there are moments where it's like, holy shit. But I've never found a real one, unfortunately.
Sylvia enters the chat.
I don't know if I've told you guys the story about when I went to the Spider-Man movie. When I was like 17, I was riding my bike around in the summer, and I went to see Spider-Man 3 by myself. And it had been out for a while, so the theater was pretty much empty, except for me and this woman who was also there. And so I settled in and I sat, and then we were like, I was there early, so we were sort of waiting for it to start. And she turns around and she says, do you like to, just starts to talk to me. She's like, do you like to go to movies here? And I'm like, yeah, not really big on superhero movies. And like, this one's a little silly. And she's like, yeah, me too. But, it's nice to see a movie. And I was like, okay, so, like, what do you do? She's like, well, I'm a psychic. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. But then I was a teenager. I was like curious. It's like, okay, like what is that like? She's like, do you want me to tell you what I think your future was? It really was like something out of like Game of Thrones, where they just like approach you on the street and like, I will tell you your fortune. I was like, well, I don't have any money. She's like, that's okay. And this didn't come true, but it sort of is true. It was more interesting because she was just doing a very good cold read, really, because we had a little bit of a conversation. I hadn't mentioned any of these details, but we were just like talking about the story or something. She's like, well, you're definitely going to be a writer or are a writer, which you could probably guess. She said something like, you're going to have one creative passion that like you think is your passion, and then like something else will actually turn out to be the thing. And then she's like, and you're going to be a writer at some point in your life, even though I had never mentioned that to her at all. Wow. And so she was correct. And I remember leaving that feeling this like weird sense of deep relief, like everything was going to be okay. And it was really wild. And so I totally get why people go to psychics.
I too have had a recent experience with people who said they were psychics. I took my first and only yoga class at the Y because I was like, yeah, sure. I just signed up and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take all the classes. And so there were a couple other people in the class and the instructor. And so we were yogaing it up and I was like really bad. At the end, the instructor and this other woman were talking to each other about being Irish and being able to see ghosts. Oh, cool. And they turned to me and say, you look Irish. And I'm like, I'm not at all. And they're like, oh, can you sense spirits? I'm like, I'm dumb as a rock, thanks. Yeah. I am. Like, I have zero. If there are psychic powers, I have zero of them. So
-5.
Negative. I'm negative on the psychic scale. In an adventuring party, which would you rather be? A fighter, a mage, a bard, a healer, or the animal sidekick?
Animal sidekick.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Raythe team is 3 for 3 animal sidekicks. Exactly. So without looking at my poll, I asked, who's your favorite character so far around chapter 12? Guess who is pulling ahead?
Raythe?
No. The top choice is Declan.
He's our edgelord, but he's just awesome.
The next popular choice is Snaglack.
Oh, of course. I wasn't even thinking about Snag. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm very happy. Very happy. Big boss. Big boss.
Then we have Finley and Aquilin, who are tied. And then last is Raythe. Granted, there aren't that many votes on this poll, but still, I think Raythe was at his peak irritating after 12, though.
That is true. I think he goes on where he becomes more popular. But I love that people love Declan. And he continues to be an ultimately cool character.
Now we're going to do a fun one. What's your weapon of choice in a zombie apocalypse? DIY explosives. A board with nails. Classic. Shotgun, biowarfare, or I'd be the scientist looking for the cure.
I'd probably be the zombie because I couldn't outrun them fast enough. But if I had to have one, I would think a shotgun just because it wouldn't require a lot of strength. Yeah. That would be good. Although my favorites are things like, honestly, sniper rifles and all that kind of stuff where I'm up high and looking down and just blowing up heads.
I don't feel like a sniper rifle does as much damage to like a horde of zombies.
It does not. It does not. But I don't know if a shotgun necessarily would either, because if you really have to take off the zombie's head, I sometimes really seriously consider that about a zombie apocalypse. I don't know what this is, but I do sometimes think to myself, like, what should I have? You know, where should the plan be where we all meet if this happens? I actually had that with my best friend, Chris, when I was younger.
Of course. Who doesn't like to fantasize about zombie apocalypse, right? For the last poll, are orange cats really different from other cats? Your choices are, yes, they're crazy. Yes, they are sweet and eat more. Yes, they're not as smart. And no, and I'm reporting you to the meownager.
Yes, I'm sorry, and they're sweet and they eat more. I think that is absolutely true, although they're also a little dumber and they're also crazier.
My orange is definitely sweet and eats a lot.
Yes, I want an orange myself, but I seem to be always getting black cats, which is fine. But yeah, I want an orangey.
Now we're going to go through some comments. And we'll start with YouTube. FluffCluff says about chapter 20. Not saying much about this chapter, but love the dynamic, and oh boy, can't wait for future chapters and when the plot gets to the point where Finley will use magic. Hee hee.
I think it's going to be really interesting because we actually just had a chapter where Finley used magic. Way down the line, it's like 100 and something. I know that sounds crazy, but trust me, so much is going to be happening after chapter 20. But Finley is fucking badass. It's impressive. He now has an undead goblin army. Let's put it that way. We're just going to put it that way.
Beth Gallivan says, another fascinating chapter. This is also about chapter 20. I always thought being able to do magic and transform myself would be cool. I still believe in magic, even at my age.
So someone asked me, like, why don't you write contemporary or something like that? Why do you write high fantasy or, paranormal? And it's because of the magic. I want there to be magic. I don't want to write about our lives as they are now unless magic comes into it. So I'm with you, Beth.
And then on chapter 19, FluffCluff says, I am going through a rough time right now, and I loved this chapter. Your books always bring me joy. To answer your question, Raythe, if I had realized I'm not human, I would definitely feel overwhelmed. Probably a few mental breakdowns, because I used to and still do struggle with who I am as a person and what I want to do with my life. But there's always that excitement and mystery of who I could be, what I'm capable of, and where my origins are from. Let me be honest, I'm my own worst enemy. I would probably hold myself back from exploring those origins, so I would need just a little nudge. Okay, I might not give myself enough credit here, but it's 50-50 for me sometimes. Some days I would need a push, others I would just need a little time before I push myself.
I think if I found out I wasn't human, I would be like, that explains everything. Because I'm like, why do I feel like such an alien? I am. So it's not just I'm a poor human. It's that I'm not human at all. Everyone's like, how does he not know? How does Declan not know? Well, think about it. If you thought you were human, why would you think you weren't? There would have to be an overwhelming amount of evidence, not just weird shit, because we all have weird shit even as humans that happen to us. So
it's the same mentality as when I was driving. I have an old 2016 car, which has gotten a lot of miles. Luckily, there was nothing there, but I was backing out, and all of a sudden, it just accelerated. My foot was not on the pedal because I usually back out at idle speed because the visibility is not great out my back window. I'm backing out, I go around the corner, and it just accelerates. I was like, what the hell is going on? And I thought, I must have fucked up. I must have done something stupid, like maybe the edge of my shoe caught on the gas pedal. But all the time I was making these rationalizations, and I go on the car forum for this particular model, and I see post after post of people saying, I was backing up into my garage, and all of a sudden the dang thing just took off and I ran into my garage shelves. Or I was pulling up to a parking spot and it just accelerated right into a brick wall. But it's easier to believe that there's something wrong with you rather than this outside thing that's happening. Like, it's way easier to rationalize inside of your own experience than to even consider that it could be something else entirely.
Just like doctors, we're taught to look for, when we hear hoofbeats, we're taught to look for horses and not zebras because it normally is horses. I mean, that's the majority of the time. And the one time it isn't, I mean, it's just a safer choice. It's the more logical decision making. We're in Chicago, Kat. We're not going to see zebras other than at the zoo. It's going to be horses.
So I personally found Declan's sort of denial of what seems obvious to the outside eye perfectly reasonable. I would do the same thing. It's like, no, fuck out of here. There's something wrong with me. I have a weird ass disease. I can't possibly be this other thing that never even occurred to me. All right, on to Spotify comments. I'm trying to keep the ones that I'm pulling out spoiler free because a lot of people talk about stuff, and even though you don't want to know that that's part of the fun. So on chapter 5, Nicole Nick says, I understand 100% what the separatists are saying. I can't even imagine it with high fantasy characters, but I imagine it as if extraterrestrials were dominating the earth. Not saying the elves are wrong. By the way, I'm already in love with this story.
I'm so glad. That's awesome. I did not consider the colonist or colonizer aspect of this until I was in the story. And then when I had the separatists, I was like, oh my God, like this is a huge part of this. Now we're not seeing the elves as evil colonizers. We're seeing them as people who helped. But there is this aspect, there's going to be this friction no matter what. And it's like they did save them, save humanity. And humanity's not, there's not enough left to have the entire earth. But how much and what amount and where should they be given land? And, what should be held in reserve for humanity? It's a fascinating question.
Yeah, if you look at humanity as minorities, it really brings certain things into perspective. That's why I love fantasy, because it's a way of looking at things that already exist just with a completely different lens.
Exactly. And I also thought the Bastons being black was going to even make this more fraught for them, because at least though they would recognize maybe what was going on, while I felt like the separatists were more like the loss of power was bothering them. The Bastons were seeing far beyond the initial point to what needs to come later, and how can we make sure that it's integrated so that they're not isolated, so that we're not on reservation, so that this does work.
p.m.b says about chapter 16, Shonda's character is extremely beautiful, especially because she, as a black woman whose perspective and experience of the world has such value. In her lifetime, she has been under 2 colonizer powers, and I honestly don't know if I, as a black woman myself, could handle that due to frustration and anger. I can't wait to see more of her character. I already love her, and she knows how to speak the language. Here they were out there downplaying Finley as if it was inconceivable.
One of the things that, and you got to forgive me because there is like, this is a black woman who said this. She's like, if they don't have a chair for you at the table, you bring your own chair. And I really see Shonda as embodying that. She knows that this is disrespectful, and she knows that they are looking at her as lesser, and she knows all of this, and yet she is not allowed that to crush her or make her think less of herself. She's like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know my worth. I know I belong here. And I know that you guys need my perspective. Not because you want to put like, you know, a superhero aspect to her. She's a human being. She's got her frailties and her frustrations and everything like that. But I do think her perspective and her perseverance, which is unfortunate, saves all of us, which I know that sounds horrible, but in truth, there's a lot of black women who are saving us a lot of the time, at least in America. So I wanted to embody that, being listened to by the people in power and being one of those people in power, because she's bringing this type of intelligence to the table. So that was my thought process.
Ellie says about chapter 15, I don't know if you've gotten this before, but I prefer your own voice when you're reading rather than the voice actors in your other series. I know you've probably spent a lot of money or such on them, but your voice is more familiar and comforting.
I'm really honored that you say that. I am going to be doing mostly my own voice work going forward, because you are not alone. In fact, we hear that almost constantly, to my shock and horror, because I find myself doing a tour of, Europe when I'm trying to, let's say, do some of these voices. But people seem to really enjoy the fact that I've written the characters. I know the characters. I wrote this scene. I know the emotional impact, and I do an okay job of making my voice reflect that, even if it's not consistent in terms of the character voices being consistent or the accents being really good. But I do think there is some value in the fact that I, as the person who wrote the story, am telling you the story.
And it's been a while since you've gotten a question, but this was specifically about writing fantasy. This happened a long time ago, and I've had it in my files. I mean, we've only been running the Night Prince for a few months, so it's not that out of date. But anyway, beebusterboo asks, I was wondering if I could get some advice on writing fantasy stories, since I plan on making my own for the first time. I'd really like some tips, since I haven't written a book before and only ever made a few pieces of story writing in general. I feel like I need help, at least a little bit, which is why I'm reaching out to one of my favorite authors, because I really want my story to be good.
Okay, for high fantasy in particular, you must have your world built before you begin. That is just a necessity. I had tried to do high fantasy in the past from the seat of my pants, and let me just tell you, the reason the Night Prince is like 5,000 times better is because I actually had an encyclopedia, and I talked the world out, and I pressure checked it well before I put pen to paper, so to speak. But as someone who's also, you've just talked about the fact that you've never actually written anything fully, I assume, a whole story, a whole book. One of the things I do recommend, quite frankly, is to go and get some of these online courses that do talk about the 3-act structure and a bunch of other things that sort of allow you to understand the structure of how a story is put together if you're writing a novel. And there's a reason for that. It really does help you to understand what's missing, that you're not just sort of, as I've done in the past, circle the drain, like with these stories. It's just like, oh yeah, we totally forgot that. I also recommend that you write fan fiction to start off as well, if you haven't already. Get your voice out there, see what people like. And I also recommend reading extensively in the area that you want to write in. But I will say about fantasy, if you love it, you definitely love it and probably have some ideas. But fantasy is probably one of the hardest things to write if you are not doing it where you're crossing over with our world, and you're going to have to create realistically a full world, society, everything you can think of, down from languages to how towns are laid out. It's a lot.
Ooh, Sylvia enters the chat.
So this is something that people don't talk a lot about when they talk about fantasy, but to me is the difference between good and bad fantasy and good and bad writing, actually, overall. Like, for example, The Night Prince, right? Like, The Night Prince is all about really power, right? Like, it's about how do you be a good king? The world that Raythe is choosing to look at and the systems that she's choosing to look at are all built around answering that question. What people make the mistake of when they decide to build a fantasy world is they think of it like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, where they go in and they think of a really bunch of cool monsters, and they think about what would a cool sword look like. And they can even get really into the weeds of like, well, if they didn't have plumbing, what would actually happen? How would you have to construct a like magical sewer system? And it's like the reader does not give a shit about your sewer system, which is unfortunate because that's what the sewer system is for. What the reader cares about is what kind of story you're trying to tell. So if you're trying to write about a ragtag bunch of people that are there to go and conquer an evil overlord, like Mistborn, for example, that book opens with them on the like plantation with the guy who's a slave is not a slave, sort of looking up at the master, and I think he smiles or something. I can't remember exactly what he does. Then, you know, there are all these other characters or whatever, and Brandon Sanderson like has a really super hard magic system where he really gets like the physics of everything, but the details that he's choosing to share are the ones that are about the story. And so you absolutely should work out all those details before you jump in. But like what Harry Potter does have, even though like sometimes like it doesn't make sense, like a time turner, like there's like so many logical question holes around that, right? But what it has is thematic coherence. And so if things make sense emotionally and thematically, they don't always need to make sense like literally. And so what I would really encourage you to do like is to think first and foremost about like, what is the burning emotional hole in your gut that makes you want to tell this story? What is the problem that this story is trying to show being solved? That is why I think fantasy is such a remarkable genre, because it allows you to change the rules of reality to answer these emotional questions.
That's actually brilliant. And that's why I would recommend going to writers' courses where people can break down what it is. Sylvia's advice is like hugely beneficial. What do you want to write? You know, why do you want to write this? But I just want to say that fantasy is amazing, but it's also, as I said, in some ways the hardest to write. But definitely I look forward to hearing more, and hopefully you come back and tell us what you did.
And tell us what you love about fantasy just as a reader.
I guess that's the end for this time. Guys, I cannot wait to hear and read more of your questions and your thoughts about the story and to share more of it with you. Obviously, a ton more to come. I think I just recorded chapter 118, baby. So I'm going to do a little bit of a plug. So if you don't want to wait, please sign up for wraithrain.com right now. You get to listen to, obviously, probably like, oh my God, over 118 chapters of The Night Prince. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll talk to you soon.